I'm picking up these AccuRail single sheath cars at swap meets for $5, $7. You know, it's one of those things where it's a make me buy it price. You know, you can't hardly walk away from them. And I've accumulated some, and I had no idea what the hell to do with them because 90% of them are Fubies, the paint schemes they put on them. And I asked around on the internet who may have had a 6-panel car like this with wood ends and a wood door. Well, the first photo I received was this one. And I said, sold. That looks like a car I want to build. And what's interesting about it, I think in 1925, they took a bunch of gondolas and made box cars out of them. So if you look at all the funny business on the side sill, all the rivets and extra gussets, and probably had something to do with the way these cars were put together to begin with. I received, I don't know, a dozen photos or more and lots of information on these cars. So it had to be built. First thing you have to do with any of the AccuRail cars is shave off all the molded on detail. Ladders go first naturally. On this particular car, on the ends here, if I can move my mouse around, on the ends here, there was a vertical support bar along here that I removed also. And one thing here where I put the arrow on this, for removing the roofs off of these cars, they give you a perfect groove here to put your saw in. So that's kind of helpful. So here I started. This is not the first car I've done this with, so I knew what I was up against. But cutting the roofs off these things will really give you a workout and get a sweat up. I'll show you why. When you're cutting through the roof, you're also cutting through a lot more plastic than you think you would. And it doesn't go easy. Here I've got the roof cut off, and now it's time to go take a shower. But anyway, there's still that second, I don't know what exactly to call it other than a piece of structure across the top of the car that I need to remove that isn't on the prototype. So here I'm using, rubbing the car on sandpaper. I use 120 grit because I don't like fooling around. I can, that way in 10 passes, I can take off as much as 100 with 400 grit. You just have to check your work now and then to make sure you're not going too far. Here I've got that removed. Now I think the car is ready to add the roof to. I talked about before these 50-foot roundhouse single sheath double door cars that I got from John Golden. Well, one of the particular cars, there was a guy who wanted some of those those auto doors that are on the ends of the cars. So one of the cars I cut the ends off for that guy. And I think I cut the other end off for myself. And then I saved the roof also. The radial roof is the right kind for this car. They may be Hutchins, I don't know. They look like a Hutchins roof. But anyway, I'm setting it on here to see just how things are going to fit. Here I'm scribing a line and then we'll basically just make several cuts and then snap the end off and then true it up on the sander. I added some, I think 60, probably 80 thousandths bulkheads inside the car to try and keep its squareness. I have all this big, thick cardboard, styrene left over from making bases for the buildings at Carlsberg. Here the roof is on, and I made one error here in because I really didn't know how to do anything different without, pardon? Without doing some extra work. So I made a decision here I regret. Talk about that here in a little bit. But in looking at the photos of the car, it only had the top door stop on didn't have a lower one. The lower door stop was on the lower door track. As you can see, this car was designed so that with a top hanging door, and then there were just some guides along the bottom keep the door from flopping. On the end of the car, you see, I'm not the neatest person in the world when it comes to this stuff. I want to get the car built. It's not going to be a display piece. It's going to operate on the railroad. I use some, this is Plastistrut L girder, or angle iron is basically what it is, to make those horizontal supports. And then what I'm talking about, where I wish I hadn't done, is I just put that plate across the top. I glued a sheet of 10,000 styrene on the end and then filed the top to match. And that's not how the prototype was done. Here's a photo of the end of a car showing how the ladders were attached, which is kind of unusual. What I did was took a ladder and I glued it to that angle iron in 2 places, and then added the bits of styrene. I used in 3 because I couldn't put the 4th one on, and then came in with rail nippers and snipped them off after they were dry. Or not rail nippers, but sprue nippers. On the underside of the car, I did minimal work, not a lot. I didn't run any, there was no point in running any lines from the reservoir to the AB valve because they wouldn't be seen anyway. The only thing of interest here would be the chain for the handbrake. Some time ago, my wife had a necklace that she had a knot or 2 in. She asked me if I could get the knots out. And of course I couldn't, but I could sure use it to make chains. Here's a couple more photos of that car. Top one's a much better photo than the bottom, but it shows the top car has a reweigh date of 46 on it, and it has railroad Roman lettering. And the bottom car, I believe, has a 54 date on it, and it has Gothic lettering. So sometime in an 8-year period, the railroad switched over from Roman to a Gothic font. And here's my car, roof's on. Some of the other pieces I've sprayed it with some Tamiya fine surface primer. It's in a spray can. I've never ever been a fan of spray cans, but this is probably as good as any. But there were straps on the corners that I didn't add before I sprayed it. And those are just strips of 5/1000 styrene that I cut and glued on. And then lots of Archer rivets. I didn't put as many on as were on the actual car, but I put them in places where they might be noticed, if anybody's going to notice them at all. Okay, here's the car painted. The roof, I painted the roof with my galvanized mix and then masked it off and painted the seam caps, the body color. This is a nice photo something sent me in later years. I think by the number, it must be a maintenance waste service at this time. But it was nice of them to paint all of the detail that go on the car. And it also shows that the running board was not painted. But I circled the Carmark cut lever here because that lasted like the life of the car. And I'm out of them right now. You can get some pretty nice photo etched ones, or not photo etched, but I think they're brass from Pierre Oliver at Yarmouth Models. And I've got to get some more of those because I got another car that needs them too that is in service with no way of uncoupling it. This is the end of my car. Again, with that big plate across the top. I may someday decide to fix that. This is a model that Fenton Wells is doing, same car, and he did a much better job at the end of the top of his car. Just a matter of adding a couple of pieces of styrene. I could do that easy enough on my car. And this is the finished car. The decals are from K4. They're made for the 8000 series cars, which are similar to the X29 cars. They're steel cars. They rebuilt them at probably in the 50s sometime, put diagonal panel roofs on them and painted them black with a white stripe along the bottom. You may have seen those. But all of these cars were intended for haul bag cement out of cement plants in the Lehigh Valley. But these cars did get around. I have a photo of one of the 8000s here in Mason City. Then after I had put on the decals and the chalk marks, and also I put on a route card, which is just a piece of leftover white decal. I used a rusty wash. I make a wash out of craft paint and a Windex, and I'll wash that on the paint that on the roof, and then kind of wick it back up again with the dry brush. Then I went up, when that dried, I went over the whole car with black. And before I did the black, I used pan pastel pencils to highlight the running board and some of the boards along the side, and then use pan pastels with the cosmetic brush on the underside and along the bottom of the sides, and for wheel splash on the ends. And here's a photo of the other side of the car. It's turned into, and I really like the car, except for my screw up on the ends. My next project is this one. This is another Fenton Wells started me on this one. It's basically a front range boxcar kit, double door boxcar kit that I've cut the ends off and will replace them with resin castings from Chad Boaz. I think the doors are in the mail from that Fenton had made and had Chad cast them. So I should be getting those maybe tomorrow or the next day. This car also had a Viking roof, which will be, and make a distinct car when it's done. The 40-foot double door cars are all neat cars anyway. But I've already started and ruined one of these cars. This body I picked up at some weird sale that the NMRA was putting on it at Indianapolis, and I was able to pick up another body. So I've got this much of it done, and I'm just waiting for castings to finish it. I have the decals, and so when I get this one done, I'll add the photos of the car I wrecked, and have another talk at that time. And that's it, end the discussion.
All right. Thank you, Clark. Any questions for Clark on that?
Oops.
What is your galvanized mix?
You know, people ask me about that. What originally what it was, and it still is I use a Floquel. I still have some Floquel, and I use Floquel silver and a Floquel gray, usually a lighter color gray. And I'll mix those together in no particular, pour some of each in. And then as I use it up, I just keep adding more. So it's basically a silver and gray mixture. There are some buildings that I've done where I've added a touch of blue to it, because sometimes the galvanizing has kind of a blue hue to it, you know, on some buildings. But basically it's just silver and gray.
Cool. All right. Well, it looks like it's coming along. We'll look forward to seeing the double door.
Yeah, that's the next one. Okay.
Yeah.
So I'll unshare the screen, stop share. Okay. Yep. There. I'm done.
Good.
Next person.
All right, Mark, are you ready?
Okay, I just got a question for Clark. Where is Fenton Wells living now? Do you know?
No, North Carolina.
Okay, because he and I go way back, like 45 years ago in Columbus, Ohio. And
yeah, he talked about that.
He had moved to Rockford, Illinois, when he had a job transfer with Barbara Coleman. And there's some L girders on my model railroad that were on his model railroad 45 years ago that have continually moved with me and are still occupy a place on the layout.
I'll have to bring up your name next time I talk to him.
Yeah, I would love to hear from him. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, he'll be at the St. Louis RPM this summer.
It's like Dave has turned into a cat.
Okay, I guess I'm ready to go here. And I'm going to talk tonight about Chicago Northwestern ballast hoppers. And first off, I want to talk about ballast on the railroad, which is very important. I mean, railroads have used cinders, gravel, crushed stone, limestone, but Northwestern has the unusual Pink Lady crushed quartzite ballast, which comes from 15 miles away from my hometown of Baraboo, Wisconsin. So I'm very familiar with the quarry and the operation of the I always refer to them as rock trains, but they're ballast trains. Northwestern was planned on, they bought out a quarry in 1957 in Rock Springs, formerly Ableman. This is a picture from 1900. And in the left foreground, you can see a little narrow gauge coming down underneath the Northwestern's bridge and into a plant called the Wisconsin Granite Company, even though there's nothing granite about it. It's quartzite, which is an ancient sandstone that's been compressed into a very hard and durable material, and it's colored pink from the presence of some iron. So Northwestern bought this pit, this quarry in 1957, kind of planning ahead and develop into a railroad ballast.
Hey,
Here's a
excuse
picture
me.
of the Pink Lady quarry. There's a little more than 40 acres in the pit, and that's 300 feet from top to bottom. So it's a big.
Could you go up and hit your slideshow?
Oh, have I not done that?
Not that I see.
Okay, so you're not seeing what I'm seeing. I'm sorry.
Across the top, there's what you see home and then insert design transmissions. There's one that says slideshow. I don't know if that, I'm not familiar. Oh, otherwise, way down in the lower right corner, you'll see a little screen next to that bar line there. That's the one I always click on. No, to your, not that one, to your left.
To my left.
Yeah. So what, you went too far. Back over right where you were. There's yeah, you're getting close. To the right, to the right, to the right. One more. There, click on that guy.
All right. I'm sorry.
There you go.
Now switch, now go to display settings up on top. Display settings and click on switch, swap presenter view and slideshow.
All right. So if you didn't see that, let me just back up again.
No,
Well,
that's
just
perfect.
1 second. What program are you using for this?
This is PowerPoint.
Yeah, but what version do you know?
I do not know.
Okay, I'm just curious because mine didn't do what yours just did, and I was thinking it's newer.
It is.
Okay, I got to be careful if I want to buy a newer one. I'll shut up now.
Let's see if it works, then I'll tell you what it is. Okay, so backing up, railroad ballast, very important. Railroads have used cinders, gravel, crushed stone, limestone, but Northwestern is unique in using crushed pink quartzite, which comes from near my hometown. And I'm very familiar with the trains and the quarry itself. Here's a picture from 1900. This is Rock Springs, formerly Ableman. And to the left is the pit that was developed into the pit. You can see in the lower left foreground, there's a little narrow gauge coming and ducking underneath the railroad bridge, and then going to the Wisconsin Granite Company where they're loading it in there. It's not granite, it's quartzite, but that's just what they called it. And there were quarries on either side of the river here. in Rock Springs. So Northwestern bought the pit in '57 in anticipation of needing something better than what they had. Here's a picture of the Pink Lady quarry. I do land surveying, and I got to survey in the pit during their expansion. And the pit is approximately, it's bigger than 40 acres, and it's 300 feet deep from the top where that tree is down to the lowest part where there's frozen water at the bottom. So it's an enormous quantity of rock that the quarry has available for the railroad to use. This is some of their equipment. They've got a big crusher that you see on the right-hand side. They're crushing the rock and then screening it and washing it. This is one of the two loaders for the ballast. This is on this pair of sidings that the one on the left serves, and barely visible on the right. They built another loader on the main line at a later date when it wasn't important to keep the main line open. They could just pull very long trains through one car at a time and load them rather than have to shuffle on the sidings. Here's a picture. This is about 1972. This is before, this is the way freight going past Devil's Lake on the way to Baraboo. And about mid-train past the boxcars, you see some Minneapolis and St. Louis hopper cars, and then other ballast cars mid-train. And at that time, the ballast cars were hauled to the pit by the way freight until enough accumulated, then they'd send power up and haul the train back. Then about 1973, they went to unit train operation. There were dedicated trains that came up and loaded the entire train, turned back around, and headed to wherever it was needed. I also want to mention that the pit, it can crush 1,200 tons of rock an hour, and it operates normally from St. Patrick's Day to Thanksgiving. During ballast season, they'll load 1 to 2 trains a day, and over 1 million tons of ballast will be shipped in a single season. So it's a signature train for me to have on my model railroad because it's big power. It's a big deal compared to the way freight. So to meet the needs of the ballast, the demand for the ballast was increased when Northwest went employee owned. They decided to repair or do maintenance on the east-west main and rehabilitate other deferred maintenance areas, plus the rehab of the Rock Island spine line and the 56 miles of the Powder River coal line expansion and the rehab to get there. So they needed to have cars haul all this ballast. And this is the 21,000 series, and Northwestern converted a bunch of covered hopper cars to ballast service by removing the doors, the roof, and then adding ballast doors on it. And in 1973 through 1977, they converted Northwestern, Great Western, and Detroit, Toledo, and Ironton covered hopper cars into these ballast cars. It's going to kind of click through. Some pictures, and as far as modeling them, I think it was E&B Valley made kits in the 80s, and the sides and ends, they were all flat and had to be glued together to make the kits. And since that time, Bowser's come out with a new model that is really good, and it comes in a three numbers, but unfortunately the ballast loads are mounted in there and they're hard to get out. So it's great for loaded trains, not so good for empty trains. And here's a Great Western one, and it got some newer paint along the way, though none of them stayed nice looking for very long. So when Northwestern was taken over by UP in 1995, there were 342 of these cars remaining. So quite substantial, but UP immediately closed down the pit, and it hasn't opened since. It's been bought out by a local supplier of stone, and I have not seen it operate, but it could be, and they could be trucking small quantities for roads, because some of the roads in the Baraboo area have pink shoulders because it's the court site. Here's some other attempts of mine to model these cars. Now this is the 110,000 series. These were built by Greenville in 1969 for a unit ore train service between a new iron mine in Black River Falls, Wisconsin, to Inland Steel down in the Chicago area. They had, I think, 107 of these. And when the iron mine closed in 1986, then they were put into ballast service. A unique car, they had two sets of airlines, and they could open the doors remotely. Here's one of the cars that got repainted right near the end, and it's got the Clintonville car shop symbol at the bottom one. And of this series, 77 of them were left when UP took over. Here's my attempt to build a couple of these, and I kit bashed them from an Athearn hopper car in which I had to fabricate new sides, doors. Here are some cars, 791,000 series. These were built for Rock Island in 1966 for their ballast service, which Northwestern acquired after Rock Island's bankruptcy. Now this particular car has got a tarp fitted on the top, and you can see on the leftmost car there were some bars. The idea was they would load these up at the end of the season, cover them with tarps, and then the ballast wouldn't freeze up during the winter, and they would be available for use during winter months, so the load wouldn't be frozen up. Here's another one of those cars with that special rigging on there. And some of the Rock Island cars, Northwestern just painted out Rock Island, but left the blue color. There's a couple of them in this train here. And one of them that did get the green repaint right towards the end. So 254 of these cars were left when UP took over. Here's one that I had kit bashed from a roundhouse ballast car, and I made new sides for it. There's that same one, former Rock Island, that I built from a roundhouse ballast car with new sides built on it. And then Northwestern also had a series of air dump cars. This one was built by Magnar in small batches from 1958 to 1965. It can dump 30 cubic yards, and they were used in places where you wanted to dump it down the embankment rather than between the rails. Later paint schemes, earlier paint schemes were black and gray. And then I had to have some of these, and there was nothing available, so I scratch built a couple of them. I think I gave you one of those, Ron, too. We'd gone to a meet and I didn't want to haul it back.
Yes, I have one.
And this is a different series of side dump cars that were made by Divco for Rock Island, that I was able to shorten up a Walther's side dump. It was too large, but it shortened up, it worked up just fine. Now, pre-1971, Northwestern had a bunch of relics, so to speak, and these were ballast cars that were converted from hopper cars at the Clintonville shops that were converted in Winona from war emergency hopper cars that had wooden sides. So these were what Northwestern had prior to really getting going and making all those conversions with from the covered hoppers and acquiring newer cars. These are some, I'll just back up. These were scratch built. There was no other way to get that unusual configuration for the ballast cars. Now, these two here, the one on the left is an Atlas ballast car, and it's a really good kit that represents Northwestern well. And the one on the right, I had kit bash from a roundhouse hopper before the Atlas ballast cars became available. And then there were some not ready for prime time ideas that Northwestern had. There was such demand for ballast in the mid to late 80s that they pressed cars into service that they never should have pressed into service. And this, believe it or not, is former Chicago and Burlington and Quincy car that Northwestern acquired, even though it doesn't have ballast car doors in it, just because they needed to haul rock. And I had seen one of these in Baraboo and I had to model it. I do not know how long it lasted, and I assume not very long. Also in that same category, Northwestern had acquired some Frisco hopper cars for hauling ballast too, and I had to build a model of one of those. And again, I'm sure it was not a good idea and didn't last long. And my picture of the prototype is about as fuzzy as this one. And they also pressed a bunch of Minneapolis and St. Louis hopper cars into service to haul ballast, and they didn't hold up well either. Now, I may have gotten this wrong because I've seen pictures of M&STL hopper cars that are painted red, but all my reference pictures were in black and white, so that's why mine is brown or black. So someone correct me on that. And that's the end of my presentation on Northwestern ballast cars and the trains they were in. Any questions?
Hey, Mark, when do you think they started reballasting the main line from Chicago to Omaha?
Well, they did it in bits and pieces. So about 1973, after employee-owned, Northwestern decided they needed to make improvements. And the East-West main was the first place that got it. And then, of course, when they acquired the spine line, they sunk a lot of money into it. And then when they got into the Wyoming coal, they had to upgrade parts of the lines and then build completely new lines to connect with the joint line. So there was, from the mid 70s to the end of the 80s, a huge demand for rock.
Now, when I was a kid back in, long before that, why everything was slag on the main line out of Chicago. Gray. I picked some of it up so I could use that for my bass.
I remember when they first put down that pink ballast in Marshalltown on the double track. And that had to be in the late 50s, then I would guess.
Okay, because the pit didn't
You
open
said
until
57.
57.
Yeah. Now, the other question is, the Milwaukee used a ballast like that. Did that come from the same place or somewhere else in Wisconsin?
Well, there are other outcroppings of this pink quartzite, and I understand that over by Sioux City, Iowa, there's some pink quartzite too, and I think there's a Sweetman quarry there, though I've never seen it.
Yeah, I asked our Milwaukee guy, I can't think of his name right now. He runs, he has a big sales. You guys know him, he's old gauger.
Oh,
Ted.
yeah.
Ted
Yeah,
Schneff.
Schneff,
Right.
Ted Schneff.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I asked him about that because at the Gladstone, the bridge, the Milwaukee Bridge had bright red ballast on it. And I asked him if that was Pink Lady ballast. He said, no, it is not. He said the bridge organization in the Milwaukee used red ballast from some, but he told me where, and I can't remember where it was, but it is not Pink Lady. And the Pink Lady I've seen really is really much paler than what the Milwaukee used.
Yeah, some of the Milwaukee stuff has got purple in it.
Yes. It is quite vivid.
Yeah. Yeah, that was my two questions. Oh, for my knowledge of those Emmett St. L hopper cars, I've got information on half of that group, and that painting information lists two different colors of red that they were painted, and publicity photos when they were new show them in a red color, but not as bright a red as those Jeeps were. And then that paint went to hell in a handbasket in a hurry. And it wasn't long till they turned brown. And then I remember seeing cars running around that you had to look for little chips of red paint left on them. So if the second batch could have been black, I don't know. I only have information on half of the cars.
It seems like at Iowa Falls, there was a bunch of, I think they were just twin hopper, Emmett St. L twin hoppers stuck there. And I believe they were black.
Yeah, the twin hoppers all the hoppers were black, except for those ones they bought new in 57. And then they picked some up when they traded the RDCs for some 3-bay hoppers. Those came in freight car red. Other than that, all their cars were black, Gons and hoppers.
Yeah, I've got some black and white pictures that look black, and I've got
Yeah.
one color picture. But by that time, it's so late in the life of that car that you can pick any color about. It's just rust.
Yeah, that red didn't last long. There's some photos, like I said, I've got a couple of publicity shots when they were new, and they're red, but they're not as red as the engines. They're not that bright fire engine red or whatever they called it. That's what they called it. They're a darker color. But then again, like I said, my sheet shows two different types of paint on that first batch of cars.
Now, normally, if you see a track today and it's pink, you can assume it was a former Northwestern line. But in 1987, the line through Rock Springs, one end of it was abandoned. So it wasn't possible to send rock trains westbound. They could only go towards Chicago. So Northwestern went into an arrangement with Burlington Northern, in which Burlington Northern would supply ballast to the western properties of the Northwestern. In exchange, Northwestern would load Burlington Northern hopper cars with Burlington Northern engines and cabooses at Rock Springs and send them in the Chicago area. Also, there was a time period in the 80s in which Northwestern was loading Conrail cars with Pink Lady, and again with Conrail equipment and power, but Northwestern crews. I don't know what that arrangement was all about, but you know, I've got pictures of plenty of trains that are both BN and Conrail at Rock Springs loading their own equipment with Pink Lady ballast.
You don't know where that stuff wound up. They could have been using it on their lines, right?
I assume, you know, Burlington Northern was taking it in exchange for supplying Northwestern with something from a pit they had
Right.
in Minnesota, that they must have used it somewhere, and what Conrail was doing with it, I have no idea.
Yeah.
Oh, back another comment on what was known as the 1958 cubic foot two bay hoppers, the covered hoppers that did you cut the roofs off of those E&B kits, or did you say that Bowser came out with that ballast car?
Okay,
They were
so
right back.
I did not take the roof off. The E&Bs were made just for that, and I'm going to get back to that.
Oh, they were made as ballast
Sure.
cars, like the one in this photo. Because I remember having the regular covered hoppers, but they did make a ballast car too, and it had those
Yeah,
gates
so they
on the
were
bottom.
former Great Western. Yeah, so in this picture in the lower right hand, these are the Bowser right out of the box, and they're really nice looking.
Oh, okay, they make them, and because I know you can buy those gates from Shapeways to
Yeah.
turn a regular 1958 into a ballast car, but I didn't know Bowser actually made them as ballast cars. That saves a lot of trouble.
Oh yeah, I mean, they're a really great kit and very nice, much better than the E&B Ballets.
Yeah, I remember those. Yeah, thank you.
Anything else, anybody?
Great job, Mark.
All
Thank
right,
you.
oh, we got another presentation, I hope.
Yeah, Dave, I think we got time for yours, for your
Okay.
recap of Mankato.
It's, this is not going to be an actual summary of the entire convention. It's just going to be some pictures that I think people might find interesting or amusing. This is St. Charles, Minnesota. This was on the way to the convention, and I've found this structure to be interesting. Trying to get rid of that here.
There we go.
I assume a coal shed.
Yep. Yeah, that would have had Insel brick on it before they painted it.
Yeah. So that's in St. Charles. Very accessible. This was also in St. Charles. And nearby was this kind of deteriorating barn-like structure. It seemed to be associated with the business. Most of what we were doing in Mankato was getting on buses and driving around to various depots in the area, some of which were still currently on the now UP, formerly Chicago, Minneapolis, and Omaha. Others were no longer served by rail. The tracks were long since gone, but in many cases, they'd been converted into museums. This interesting grain elevator is near the Mankato Depot, which is right on the tracks, but is no longer railroad owned. It's an investment firm and a real estate firm inside. So we couldn't go inside the depot, but I think every side of that grain elevator has these huge paintings on it. I'm trying to advance and it's not advancing. Here we have, this was during our bus tours, we have Christensen's Farms in Sleepy Eye, Minnesota.
It's
So,
spelled correctly.
so obviously Ron is doing considerably better than he lets on. In the Sleepy Eye Depot, they had all manner of, it's a kind of a general museum, not a specific railroad museum, but they had some railroad stuff. So here's some Sleepy Eye flour. And kind of an interesting ice house. This picture was hanging out. And I don't recall my mother using Mrs. Stewart's liquid bluing in her automatic or regular washer. Nor did we have much call for a Banner root cutter at our house, but the antique shop was, they didn't actually have the root cutter. I think they had this part of the box. And if you go back far enough, you might remember learning to read from these things. In one of the museums we were in, it was a small house. They had a number of buildings on the property, a small house, no stove on the upper floor, but a couple of stoves on the ground floor. And then these floor vents would be right above those stoves. So you'd at least get some hope of some heat up in your bedroom. One of the museums we were at, this might be St. James, had a kind of a nice backdrop and some nicely done structures. The kid who was running the trains was not particularly interested in what he was doing, so he didn't know much about who had built any of these things. But there were some things to see on that layout, strictly an exhibition layout, possibly a club. Now this is in Westbrook, Minnesota, and in the museum there, this was a model built by the local barn builder to show farmers what they were going to get for their money. And it's kind of interesting that it lasted this long, because you'd think at some point people would have given it to kids to play with and it would have just been trashed, but it's in seemingly perfect shape. So here's the caption for that. This is again in Westbrook, Minnesota. And again, I have no idea where we were. We'd get on the bus and just go. Also at Westbrook was this rather macabre item. But again, notice the name of the undertakers, Klaas and Christensen. This is a wicker casket. And you'd say to yourself, what call could there be for wicker caskets? Well, this was what was used to pick up the bodies at the house to take them back to the mortuary for embalming. So it came with a beer stand, pallbearer gloves, and a cooling table. A little piece of road grading equipment just rusting away at one of these museums. And this was turning, but not actually pumping. But what was interesting is that it was still connected to the pump. So you could actually see what a windmill like that would actually be doing. At the convention itself, rather begrudgingly, they scheduled a modelers roundtable, but they scheduled it right opposite one of the most interesting talks of the whole convention. So I didn't get to see the entire talk, but when I did get in, here's Dennis Eggert showing the structure that he scratch built to get him the Lloyd Kaiser Award, which is kind of the top model of the displays. It's no longer a contest, really. It's displays, but the very best model gets the Lloyd Kaiser Award. And this is also Dennis's work, a Northwestern so-called peekaboo gondola for hauling pulpwood. The reason for the gap in the side of the car was so they could sweep it out. Another museum had one of these. I remember these chewing gum dispensers in some buildings. And a postal unit. When you didn't have a post office per se, something like this would be put in a store or other public building. And that was basically the post office. I found this interesting. You don't often see a trademarked or patented tie plate. And another view, the back view of that heavily painted grain elevator in downtown Mankato. It's in use and rail served. Some surviving paint in what's known as Mankato's Old Town. I see reference to Durham smoking tobacco, dry goods and groceries. And one of the old buildings in that mill had some very interesting architectural details, including where the rods would go through the building to kind of keep it from spreading out and falling down. But I also found the brick detail to be interesting, a very rough-sided brick. And in Mauston, Wisconsin, the local Quick Trip along the freeway has mounted an entire truck and trailer so they can advertise how expensive gas was for this trip. But it's a real truck. So if you have some truck you don't want to use, make it a gas station sign. And I think that does it.
Very good. That'd make a nice model.
So that really isn't a summary of the convention. It's just a few things that struck me as being interesting or funny.
Yes, very good. Very good. Well, appreciate everybody's presentations today. We will meet again next week. And I'm not sure who's presenting yet, but if you'd like to present, just let me know. Thanks to Clark and Mark and Dave today. That was very enjoyable. And I'll be putting the recording up probably sometime tomorrow.
Bye.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great night.
Thank you.